Good afternoon. Thank you all for your attention today. Little Caesars Pizza, by the way. I cannot stand the smell of tomato sauce out of a can. That was my first job. 20 years ago, like Emma, I had a lot of choices to make. I actually started off doing what all of you do. My choice at the time, however, when I was leaving this other university down the street in where we wear different colors than maroon, my choice was to go to Arthur Andersen, do my final 9 hours, sit for my CPA, and fast track on to audit and then consultant. And my mom was excited because she wanted me to stay in Texas. My other choice was Enron. Arthur Andersen was their accountant, and my other choice was a company called Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, DLJ. It's no longer with us today. I kept trying to convince my mom that I was actually not going to work for an international freight company. Anyhow, I went off to Wall Street. What Emma did was the right thing to do if you get that opportunity to go to Manhattan, do it, and fight for your CFA like she did. My talk's gonna be a lot different than the first three that preceded me. I see the world, those are not my neurons. I see the world through graphs. I see the world through graphs because when I started on Wall Street in 1995, 1996, we were not supposed to question. We were just supposed to accept what we were told. And there was something to be said about taking it on faith during the dot-com bomb that eventually erupted. The fact that I didn't take things on faith and that I started to ask questions of my own, which is why it's so important to do your own legwork. That's what caused me to start seeing the world as I see today. I advise institutional investors after I left Wall Street. I ended up working at the Federal Reserve for about a decade. I was a terrible bureaucrat, I mean, awful. Just didn't like the rules at all, but I ended up advising Richard Fisher for the better part of a decade. And the value that I provided him was that I learned to question things through pictures. And every time he was going off to Washington, D.C. for the Federal Open Market Committee, I would brief him on every aspect of the macro economy and the financial markets. And I looked at data. I looked at the world of economics and the financial markets through as many different prisms as I possibly could, because that put me at the opposite end of the spectrum of the PhDs in academics. I'm gonna run you through a few quick charts. Just to give you, if you will, a primer on where we stand today. I had no idea I was going to be standing here on the eve of No Non-Farm Payroll Friday, because we don't get a jobs report in the morning. My firm, however, we look at things through the opposite prism, so our clients are now finding us to be in even greater need because we've always looked for alternatives. You don't necessarily have to follow a narrative if somebody else has written it for you. In any event, in the last 12 months or so, this chart on the left, share of young adults living with a parent, that's at the highest level since the Great Depression. This one chart has resonated with me the very, very most because it shows us that our opportunities are limited as they haven't been for nearly a century. That means that creativity, telling our stories, living our narratives, sharing them, makes it that much more important. But we're living in a time of great change. Right now, as you can see, Americans are becoming renters, they're not becoming homeowners. That's not an American dream, and you have to question when you see these things. We were told also for the better part of the last 18 months that we were not in a recession in the United States. Now we've come to find out that that's not true. Now, I knew it wasn't the case when it was happening in real time because I didn't believe what I was being told. I didn't believe the formal data. But now that we see actually, because when you see things like, gee, if people can't pay the rent, and yet Jerome Powell, chair of the Fed, keeps maintaining that it's a solid job market, who do you believe? Do you believe the people who are not paying the rent, or do you believe official data? And I would say, look away. Always question what you see. And here we are today. We have more than half of the industries in the United States that are not creating jobs. We have very low breadth, if you will, with a D. And this is where we get to the data and the message in the data. And what we've been told much more recently, now that we're focused on things like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, on revisions, if you look at that fuchsia line and you see what the response rate has been for the most quoted figure in all of macroeconomics, the unemployment rate, we've gone from 90% a few decades ago of people telling you what their work situation is or is not, to south of 70%. And so what does that tell you about the efficacy of what you hear every Saturday morning when you read the front page of the newspaper, or you're looking at the Wall Street Journal online and you see that the unemployment rate has been stuck? That's that purple line. The unemployment rate hasn't moved. And you're told that's good news. The job market is solid. The economy is strong. And yet, the response rate has come down as much as it has. Always ask the questions. I'm deeply inspired by Emma because she actually pressed her way through the CFA. There were times I never thought I was going to get through my MBA, and I certainly didn't think that they were going to allow a girl from Texas to go to Wall Street. But I did. But when you live your dream, when you persevere, and when you believe in yourself, then you'll always question narratives. You'll always be able to do the groundwork on your own. And these types of things make you ask the question. The University of Michigan has completely revamped the way it surveys Americans. Today, 65% of Americans say that the unemployment rate is going to rise in the next 6 months. We're never at that level. We're never beyond the 50% level if we're not already in recession, which tells you that we're already in recession and that we have been. And by the way, they've increased the size of their survey, which is something I would argue that our government needs to consider doing. We are in a big data era. We're in artificial intelligence. We have different ways that we can gather data to be more honest with the public. And that is indeed where we should be going. It is up to your generation to take us to the next frontier of creating official data. If we go the opposite direction, that's the way of a banana republic. And we don't want to go that way because their clothes aren't in fashion anymore. Anyways, I digress. So we were recently told with very quickly relayed revisions that this June, as in just a few months ago, was the first negative print, the pandemic notwithstanding, in 15 years, since September 2010. Now that's a quickly reported revision in a machine that works about as fast as molasses in January. But what we do know is that when we add up all of the states together, that it looks like this June's going to be revised to an even deeper negative. Now, when we get to longer term revisions, and that's exactly what we're looking at here, revisions that are reported 18 months, 24 months after the original data were reported, we find out that we actually entered recession. We started with net job losses in the second quarter of 2024. It's a very good reason that Americans voted for change. Not that they were being told at the time that the economy was losing jobs. They were being told at the time that the economy on a net basis was creating jobs, and yet it wasn't. And we've seen that carry through into the first quarter of 2025. So I will leave you with this final chart. And this dictates where the financial markets are going, by the way. This is the most profound thing that you can ever look at because 2/3 of flows into the financial markets today are passive in nature. When we have a greater degree of baby boomers leaving the market, labor force exits, than we do millennials and younger generations entering the markets, there are fewer people contributing to their 401ks. Your net entrants must, I'm not talking to you about Bitcoin, I can promise you that much. But we must have more entrants into the job market than we do people exiting. If we don't, then my former employer, the Federal Reserve, cannot just lower interest rates and hope that this injection of liquidity is going to save us, because demographics is destiny, and never forget that. It won't matter for a very, very long time. It hasn't mattered for decades, right? Millennials and Gen X make up 48.5% of the voting population in the United States. But right now, When it comes to the boomers, they've got their money in cash. And that means that my former employer, everybody's saying that the Fed needs to go back to the zero bound and launch quantitative easing. Show of hands real quick. Anybody know what QE is? Yes. Zero bound. Yes, good. The Fed can't go back to that place. And I'll leave you with that thought, because every 50 basis points, every half percentage point of rate cuts means you're taking $71 billion in cash, in interest income, out of the hands of boomers, who, by the way, own more than half of the stock market. Always question the data. Always write your own narrative. Always do the homework, live your dreams, and then you can tell great stories. Thank you so much for having me.